Good morning, everyone. I'm Vivian from Singapore Water Association. Thank you all for attending today's webinar on the water market in Southeast Asia. Today's webinar is co-organized by Singapore Water Association and LVI Associates. LVI Associates is the leading specialist recruitment agency for the infrastructure sector. They were founded to give candidates and clients a peace of mind that the recruitment process is in expert hands. SWA, since established 2004, we have been instrumental in profiling and promoting Singapore as a pivotal regional hub for all water-related services. We provide a platform to build effective networking, facilitate opportunities for collaboration, and foster the exchange of ideas and knowledge among the member companies. Before we proceed, I'd like to touch on some housekeeping rules and disclaimer clauses. To ensure a smooth webinar, please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. You may communicate with us after the session. Please share your questions in the chat. We will try to provide answers where possible in the Q&A segment. Do identify yourself so we can respond to any unanswered question after the session. We'll be recording this session and reserve the rights to all videos. Please complete a post-event survey, which upon return, will forward the recording and presentation tag to the respondents. All information in this webinar is for general information only and does not contain or convey any legal advice or administrative assistance. Information shared today is true and accurate as of publication date. SWA and LVI Associates reserve all rights in the provided materials. Today, we are pleased to have Mr. Pavi Bansa, the Managing Director of Amain Advisors Southeast Asia, with us to speak on the water market in Southeast Asia. Mr. Pavi has over 22 years experience in strategy, M&A, restructuring, and corporate finance in Southeast Asia and the India markets. We have Ms. Kaylee Regan as our moderator for today. Kaylee is the head of the Water and Transportation of LVI Associates. She now leads one of the largest and most successful specialist teams within LVI Associates. For today's program, we'll start off with a welcome address by SWA Council member, Dr. Chew Kuan Ping, followed by introduction by LVI Associates and Mr. Pavi Bansa, to explore on how is COVID-19 impacting the water market in Southeast Asia, what is the next direction of the water market, what is hot in the water market in Southeast Asia, followed by a Q&A segment before we close for the day. Without further ado, may we now invite Dr. Chew Kuan Ping, Council Member of Singapore Water Association, Executive Director of ACON, to give us the welcome address. Dr. Chew, please.
We believe that by innovative and generating of the good solution, we should be able to allow us to move up the value chain to be leaders, partners, and advisors to business and the community in the Southeast Asia water market. In closing, I look forward to hear some advice and the direction given by Mr. Bansa, and hope that we all enjoy and take advantage of this opportunity to see what we can work together to have the overall opportunity after this pandemic. Thank you so much. Let's have the webinar start with Mr. Bansa.
Thank you, Dr. Chew, and thank you, SWA, for inviting us to co-host this webinar today. So I'm Kaylee from LVI Associates, and in case you don't know us, we are an energy and infrastructure recruitment company that operate across APAC and also the rest of the world. So I would like to welcome Pavi Bansa from Amain Advisors, who will be joining me this morning to discuss the water market in Southeast Asia and how COVID is impacting this. So Pavi, do you want to start off? So how do you see COVID impacting the water market in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks LVI and SWA to give us an opportunity to connect with the water community in Southeast Asia. Just as introduction, Aman, we are water specialist boutique advisory firm working across the water value chain both on the industrial, municipal, and technology part of the water sectors. And we have been operating over 15 years around across 6 countries across the globe. Now, Kelly, you raised a very important point, how water is impacting Southeast Asia in the current COVID situation. Now, if I look at in March, when we were looking at our business and when we were talking to our clients, today's situation has completely changed. We were never anticipated that COVID would extend so long and we would have lived through a last 5 months locked up at homes and trying to see how do we run our businesses. And that's across everyone, whether it's consulting, operation, EPC players, equipment vendors across the board. So the biggest impact that we see is currently is that at the utilities end, there has been a significant drop in revenue. And that has been led purely because of significant shutdowns on the commercial activities across the world and so in Southeast Asia. Tourism sector, we've seen the offices shut down, intermittent shutdown of factories, and all in all, what is impacted is the biggest value payers for utilities actually were the most hit in the market. And that really has put a lot of stress on utilities around the region. And so on and so forth. Their cost structures haven't changed because they are still running a very vital infrastructure and they need to be fully prepared to meet any demand requirements. So it's a bit of a situation where revenues have significantly become impacted, the cost structures haven't changed, and that really has impaired the cash flows for the businesses. The second key impact that we see in Southeast Asia, and it's more so in our part of the world, is government, because governments play a key enabler for water sector across the region, and they're the key spender in the water sector. So given the inability for governments to really move on with the decision making and the focus on protecting the wider communities, a lot of the government decision makings have basically come to a standstill, which definitely impacts various discussions happening at various project levels and also in terms of policy matters across the board. The other key impact has been construction. Now, like in Singapore, for the last 5 months, there has not been any construction activity. We don't have workers on the ground to execute projects. Even if the management and the top management of the businesses are available, the banks are open, but we don't have workers. And that situation is true across the region in a number of markets. So the construction activities have come to standstill. A number of supply chains, even the issues around contractual commitments between vendors have come up for great stress. And we see that the construction is really suffering in the current pandemic situation. And there are project delays that is definitely everyone is contemplating and is trying to address. And that's a lot of stress at the operating. Yeah.
I mean, how long do you see this lasting for, Pravi? Do you think it's going to go far into 2020 and even beyond this?
So if you look at 2019 across the region, on the capital expenditure side of utilities, there was about $5.49 billion spent across key markets in Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia. What we expected was that in the current year, the spend would have increased to about $6.27 billion. But based on what we understand is that this would see a drop of about 12% so that it essentially could meet what we spent in 2019. And it is not expected that things may materially change in 2021. So in essence, our hypothesis is that at least till middle of 2021, things will remain slow, though lots of the markets, depending upon how the pandemic plays out and how the businesses are led to open up and people are free to travel, can have a different impact in each of the countries in the region. But do we see that there is a slowdown till middle of 2021? So in terms of the impact on the water markets, we see that there has been a significant reallocation of state budgets, both at the central level across the governments and at state level across the regions in the various countries. And each of the utilities across the regions are currently stressed out in terms of re-looking at their budgets, their capital expenditures, their OPEX budgets, and how they realign with the cash flows that they have in hand. So definitely we see that there is a reassessment which is happening as we talk on both the short-term and medium-term financing needs to support the utilities. And mind you, across a region, we see a number of utilities are subsidized through state and central budgets. So definitely this adds on to more stress in terms of how the utilities may see. So barring few regions in Philippines, Malaysia, parts of Vietnam and Singapore, the situation is expected to be a bit of a challenge across for utilities. And with the continued state spending on stimulus packages, this is insinuated. One of the segments that when we're talking to our clients, we see has shown some resilience, and we expect that to show is one is the healthcare and other is the food and beverage sector across the Southeast Asian region. Now, the industrial water markets, we may see slowdown in other sectors, but definitely players in glove manufacturing, pharmaceutical, and F&B, which is a very large ecosystem in Southeast Asia and has been pretty resilient over the decades. We expect that this will provide some resilience from industrial water markets across the region.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting that you say that, because even when we speak to our clients, it seems that healthcare and F&B is the part of the business that's keeping things going. So it's quite good to see that these markets have stayed resilient through the tough times. But in your opinion, what direction do you see the water market going in? Do you predict there to be many changes?
So in terms of the direct way the water market would go, and it's not been that COVID has changed that. I think it has been historically being a reality that we see a need for private sector participation to be much stronger across the region. We see a significant role of multilateral financial institutions to supplement what governments are doing with infrastructure budgets. And in hand, we see that the PPP frameworks across the region needs to be strengthened and are being strengthened as we talk for a number of years now. And all these three needs to play hand in hand to really support the investment needs in the region. Mind you, we don't have across the region a universal water and sanitation infrastructure which is fully operational yet. So there is a large capital needs in the region, and we definitely see the private sector has a great opportunity, plus the market needs that they need to play a much more innovative role to address the needs, and especially in the current environment where we see governments may take a backseat in terms of infrastructure. We see a number of multilaterals have been actively pursuing development activities. In Indonesia, we've seen since the 2015 PPP law, 4 projects have been financed through PPP with ADB's help. We see ADB actively supporting non-revenue water initiatives in Vietnam. We see JICA quite active, Danida quite active. So we see that these institutions will need to play a much more active role, not only on the financing, but also to help improve the governance of the utilities in the region. The other interesting component that we see in the recent times, multilaterals have also started to support startups We've seen ADB recently come out with a $50 million fund to support commercially viable water tech, water solution, and clean tech initiatives. So there are green shoots happening in the market in terms of longer term solution sets that we need at a cost structure that works for Southeast Asia. As I mentioned earlier, that private sector has to increase the spend, and that's quite visible from the historical data points and going forward. So out of the $5.54 billion budgets in 2018, around 33% was financed through private sector, and the rest was all government expenditures. We expect that to go up to above 45% going forward in the short term, and that's quite critical to support the needs of the region. So it's an opportunity for the private sector to really participate and work across with the governments to develop the water infrastructure across the region. Having said that, we do see certain level of challenges from for developing commercially viable projects, especially on the municipal side, and that's something countries in the region like Vietnam have recently come out with a new PPP law to provide protection against foreign exchange risks around investments, even revenue risks for PPP projects. Indonesia in 2015 came up with the new PPP laws. They actually also cleaned up the Padam's balance sheets in the recent times. So governments are actively pursuing it, but we do see that there is, I would say, a bit of shortages of quality projects which are commercially viable, and unless there is a viability gap funding in some of these projects, those projects don't take off, and that's where private sector struggle at times to commit a 15 to 20-year investment in these projects. Hopefully, we expect that this pandemic will push all the actors across the water value chain to facilitate changing in the regulations and also facilitating better pricing for at least on the municipal side to improve the viability of certain projects in the region. The other interesting thing that we see is definitely there is an increased compliance standards coming in the region. Like in Philippines, they have mandatorily implemented standards to improve the wastewater discharge. So they come out with for various subsector industries to improve the ammonia, the nitrate, the collagen content in the wastewater discharge, and that should help to create construction demand both on the wastewater and seepage side in Philippines. And we see that happening in Vietnam, where each of the water utilities are working with operators to actually enhance the standards for wastewater and also improving the pricings for wastewater discharge. So we see that there are green shoots and the need for improved standards, which should help companies to bring in new technology and solutions to the markets in the region. The other interesting thing which has been talked in the region, but utilities generally have been a bit reluctant to take on, is digitalization. It has been generally true around the world. We've seen that not only in Southeast Asia, we see that in our clients, whether it's in Europe or US markets. But COVID has actually brought that challenge. COVID has actually brought on this challenge. Cannot ignore how they look at the current situation where there is such a disruption happening on the revenue side and on operations side, that digitalization is the need of the hour, and we see that as a great opportunity for operators and service providers who provide solutions in digitalization and help in non-revenue water. If you look at our region, basically, we have a massive unmet demand in Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam. Our water coverage in Vietnam is 35%. In Philippines, it's 58%. Indonesia, 18%. So there is a massive shortage of water infrastructure that exists across a region. The non-revenue water losses across a region is highest in the world. We have 33% NRWs in Indonesia, Malaysia 35%, Vietnam 24%. And if you look at Singapore as a reference point, there is a lot that can be done. And this is value that is lost on the downstream side, and no one is a winner in that. So we definitely see that that this opportunity is there on the ground for the service providers and technology players to come in and work with the utilities to help manage and reduce the downstream challenges the businesses face. And that's for even true in terms of the pandemic that is thrown in. How do we interact with customers? How do we manage remote billing and collections to ensure that the utilities can get collections in time to pay for their expenses? So the market is really needing the solutions, and it's all the actors need to work together to really address this challenge on the ground. In terms of on the infrastructure side of water, we see definitely on the downstream side, there are opportunities around network management, opportunities are around leak detection, and these are technologies which are available now at a much better pricing than it was a decade ago, basically. And definitely that's something which is an opportunity for the water players across the regions.
I think what you're saying about digitalization is actually so important, and it's honestly something that the water market has been missing for a while. So from like a recruitment standpoint, we've seen a lot of our clients invest heavily in bringing people from like Amazon, Google, just to bring that digital skill set into the water market. So yeah, it's interesting to see how it will go. But I think it is pretty essential for us to move forward as a region. But following on from that, what do you see as being hot right now in the water market in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think each of our clients look at things a little differently in the current market, depending upon where are they in the value chain. We definitely see private financing for the municipal water and wastewater infrastructure needs in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines as a great opportunity. It's a need of the hour, and we see that international players, whether it's coming in from international aid agencies or multilaterals or private investors, to really partner and work in these markets to really address the immediate needs in the market. The other aspect that we just discussed is on the technology and digital side. We see that governments in Malaysia has actually sort of allocated budgets of over $450 million to actually address the non-revenue water challenge in Malaysia. We see that in Vietnam, the way the current contracts are being addressed, the non-revenue water, it has created an opportunity for players to provide potentially water as a service, which we see that in the US market, and also look at innovative ways where one can work around where performance-based contracts to push through the concept of much more risk sharing with the utilities. And that's directionally where we expect opportunities to come by for solution providers. The other segment that we see is the industrial parks. So on the industrial side, we see definitely with the current realignment of supply chains and manufacturers of F&B, technology products, pharmaceutical players, all are looking at getting solutions beyond China in terms of their supply chains. And industrial parks in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand, we see a greater level of interest today. And that throws in a great opportunity for players to come in and play not only on addressing the processed water needs, but also on the waste water recycling. Because number of these players never planned the surge in demand, especially like on pharmaceutical side or on the glove manufacturing side of the surge in demand. And unfortunately, they don't have huge access to immediate access to water to meet that the demand. And hence, reuse and recycling is become a very important aspect of their planning now. And that should really support the investments coming on the industrial parks. And it's a good opportunity for the solution providers to target this segment. The other interesting market segment that we see is around the solution on the residential and commercial water filters, softeners market in the region. If you look at what's happening in European markets and US, there is a clear visible direction to move away from using water hydration, that is plastic bottles, for drinking water needs. And we see that market quickly catching up in this part of the world as international players align with the ESG and climate change needs. Now, if you look at this market, currently the water filters and cooler markets are about $900 million in Southeast Asia. But given the population of about 660 million and using the data point that bottled water market is about 7 billion in the region, we see a significant structural change coming in the market on how the consumers are buying and using water both on the residential and commercial side of businesses. We can read that Nestle recently announced plans to exit the plastic water bottle market in US, and we see that trend continuing across the consumer companies in the region. And that should really support a structural change in how we see the water filters and coolers market in the region. The other interesting component is obviously F&B, which is a very large segment in Southeast Asia, and especially with in the recent years, the biological, biogas, anaerobic processing has really created opportunities for large F&B players to look and create revenue streams out of the waste that they generate, and also to meet up to international export standards for zero discharge, especially when they're exporting across beyond the local markets. And that should sort of support a number of solution providers and technology companies to support their demand. And definitely we see, especially on the pharmaceutical and healthcare side, like glove manufacturers really asking for more water, which they cannot get in short term. And that's why they need a much more focus on recycling and reuse as a way to manage the increased demand for their products.
Thank you. So yeah, going back to what you were saying about growth coming from countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, I think we've definitely seen that as well. A lot of international companies are trying to enter these markets. And I think one of the hardest things about it is that there's not that much local talent in these countries because this kind of infrastructure is just quite new to them. So I think it's going to be a big challenge, but I do agree that, yeah, these are massively upcoming countries and definitely a space to watch. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Pravi. We're going to go on to a Q&A session now. So I've got a few questions here from the audience. So, okay, so what impact do you see on investors' appetite during these current times to actually invest in the water market?
I would say the investors definitely have always been looking for opportunities in Southeast Asia. When we talk to our clients across the region, whether coming from China, Middle East, or Europe, or within the region, some of the large operators, they're looking for opportunities to really grow their businesses. The challenges are, as I mentioned earlier, is around looking for quality projects where they can invest money in. And the other bigger issue now is being the bit of the dislocation to ability to travel and meet the ground teams to undertake studies and viability assessments and surveys on the ground. So definitely the investors are quite actively bullish about the region, but definitely there will be a bit of a slow process given the current restrictions around travel in the region.
Okay, thank you. And if anybody's got any more questions, please put them in the chat. But for the next one, can you tell me more about the opportunities for water filters and water coolers?
So as I was talking about that, the end customers, whether it's the residential customer or a commercial customer, they have been traditionally using either boiled water in the region or just using tap water with minimum filtering solutions in the market. Now, with the moving away from use of plastics around the world, we see that the retail and the commercial customers would look for better solution sets. And that's around whether it's on the point of use or point of entry in the residential and commercial segments. And that's where a massive opportunity is coming up for all the larger players to realign how do they get around and meet tourism demand without plastics. How do they get around hotels to give quality water but without using plastic bottles. And so the solution has to come in within the region, and there are a number of good solution sets around the world which are getting rolled out.
Okay, thank you. And the next one is, how strong is the competition from local players in the PPP markets in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines? And how can a foreign company compete with them?
I would say that it's not a question of a competition. I think the market is quite large, as we see that we still have a massive gap between for penetration of tap water across the region. So it's an issue of more of a collaboration than a competition in the region. And I see that that's been the reality, though you have strong incumbent players in each of these markets. But it's more an issue of how do we collaborate and work in the region than a competition.
Okay, and to follow on, someone's just asked, do you think it would be wise for foreign companies to adopt like a wait and watch strategy before entering the region?
I would say that our region, unfortunately, is quite complicated. The local market of Vietnam, the rules, the regulations are quite different from Indonesia or for Philippines region. So it really depends how each of the international players are well versed and well tuned to how the operating local environment is. So if one hasn't done his groundwork to understand the local issues and challenges, then it will be a struggle. So it depends upon in the value chain how far one has really gone on the ground to understand the local challenges and issues in the market in attacking it. So wait and watch is a default solution, but as always, infrastructure development takes time. So one has to really take a much more proactive role, and depending upon the strategy of the company.
Yeah, because I think there's quite a few European, American companies that are trying to enter the Southeast Asia market. So it's quite hard to know what strategy to take to actually do it successfully. But do you think that, sorry, there's another question. So do you think Indonesia is ripe for digitalization in the water sector yet?
We've seen historically pockets of, I think, technological use in parts of Indonesia already. The structural challenge in Indonesia has been that the padams are responsible for the downstream operations. And that is where, though the solution providers have ample number of solutions, the challenge has been how do we work and collaborate and get around the solution sets around it. So definitely the market is quite ripe. They have about 33% NRW in the market, which is currently a loss. And definitely there is the market is right. It's an issue of how do we work with each of these paradigms to really cross the line around it. And we see a number of players trying to work around various contracting structures to cross this challenge. And there are certain successes that we see happening in the markets.
I agree. Even from our standpoint in recruitment, we do see technology companies entering the Indonesian market and being successful. So yeah, I think it is ready. It's just like you said, probably sort of how you tackle it and what the strategy is. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Pavi. It's honestly really good to hear from an expert on how you see things moving and where to look for the next big thing. If anybody else has got any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll follow up with you directly afterwards. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks everyone to participate, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Kaylee. Thank you, Mr. Pavi, for the sharing session. Thank you all participants for attending today's webinar. We look forward to your participation to our next webinar on the 20th August. Biofilms in the urban water cycle. If you have further questions on the webinar itself, kindly contact Singapore Water Association. If you have more questions for our speakers and Kaylee, please contact our main advisor and Kaylee herself. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.